think men's time is kind of viewed as diamond or like finite, and women's time is viewed as sort of infinite.
Welcome to Uplift and Elevate. This is our Uplift Her guest podcast series that shares the courageous journeys of individuals getting an honest look into their life, their struggles, successes, and how they broke down barriers to get where they are today. We are Amy and Christina and believe honest conversations can help give you the elevation and empowerment to write your own success story. This is part 2 with Sophie Maydon. Sophie has spent the early part of her career in one of the biggest VFX houses, supporting the company through one of its major growth phases by leading its large-scale recruitment team. But over 5 years ago, she founded Pixel Talent, where her and her team focus on matching hundreds of people with the right companies. They're now a global team of 6 and a regular go-to for many companies and individuals across VFX, animation and creative industries. With 3 children of her own, Pixel Talent is led from the front with Sophie's absolute passion for supporting working families and helping companies create more sustainable talent practices.
There was something I was listening to the other day, and it was a podcast on the BBC, and actually somebody was talking about the impact of part-time working as well, and actually how women return to work after having kids, and they quite often will go down the route of having trying to find part-time work to be able to balance like kind of home care and careers and stuff like that. But actually that being one of the most detrimental things that they can do to their career, because they end up working 3 times as hard to be able to kind of maintain a position or like visibility or kind of just actually complete day-to-day tasks. They're paid less, and actually they are overlooked significantly for any progression opportunities as well. You've talked to loads and loads of women. What's kind of your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly on the sort of part-time or reduced working hours, in theory.
Theory is the good line.
There are definitely, so many more accommodations made for women now, which is, in terms of them having the opportunity to be flexible or to work reduced hours. But this is having a detrimental effect on, pay and women's opportunity to progress. And I think there's definitely sort of biases that exist in organisations around women who are part-time working and what that means in terms of their sort of capability or
commitment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or perceived commitment.
Exactly. And when actually they're doing 2 roles or more than 2 roles. And, Amy, what we all talked about before, just the sort of, I guess, focus on this in terms of mothers and the fact that the discussion really needs to be about fathers as well.
Yeah.
And how do we set up society, I guess, for there to be opportunity for men to take time off or be more involved in their, take time off through paternity or shared parental leave and be more involved in the kind of early years childcare and early years care of their children, and just what a big impact that could have on the sort of societal view that women are the primary carers and therefore should be making these accommodations in their career. And for some women, I think, for some working mothers, they will absolutely want to do that. And be the one who is there. But I think that right now we don't have sort of good opportunity for men to be more involved in that, and the kind of cultural view of that is the it's still that mothers will take that time off and be the ones who are responsible. And I think the sort of stats around the kind of shared parental leave side of things has been that it has not been successful. It's like
ridiculously low.
And I think, you know, that's partly because it often makes more financial sense for the women to take time off. So
It's interesting though, you say like kind of financial sense. I don't know if that like is all okay. Like I'm not talking maybe for the vast majority, but I don't think that always makes sense. But I think there's so much more like to try and uncover about how like we perceive like gender roles and all of that kind of stuff in the company. And the problem is a lot of it is quite subtle. So it's not like you can kind of be outraged or anything else like that. It's just it's actually quite subtle behaviors that this bias that kind of comes out that is perceived that actually a woman will get to a certain age and she will have children, therefore her focus like kind of will go elsewhere. Well, she has a family, she's less committed to kind of what she, the occupation or the career that she kind of had before. And I suppose the thing is starting to kind of go and say, would you ever ask a man that?
I think men's time is kind of viewed as diamond or like finite, and women's time is viewed as sort of infinite. And so we're trying to, you know, balance our careers and like very, you know, demanding jobs against you know, having children and being expected to cope with it all. And I think our generation of women were kind of told, well, you can be anyone, and you can do anything. But certainly I was not aware of like actually what the reality is in terms of the sort of government and societal limitations around
Yeah.
that. Because of that, I think women, like mothers who are working, feel like they're failing, like, because, you know, it's really hard, like, and nobody talks to you about it. And it's and they're not failing, it's just really difficult, like, you
Yeah.
know, the support and the policy around things like childcare, and has not, you know, caught up and is not fair and real. So you're not failing, basically. I think it's just that it's really, really hard. And so I think it's really important to like have these conversations between women and within organizations as well, because you know, we need to acknowledge these, you know, these sort of societal challenges and biases, and work out like how we're going to support women better. Well, I guess while sort of the government catch up with things.
I'd really like to talk about how your experience of returning to work, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of mentioned, if I go back to kind of one of the comments that you mentioned, like kind of before you took 9 months off for your first child, and then obviously took like effectively nearly half the amount of time for your second child.
Mm-hmm.
I took a year off with my daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and I know my experience of returning to work, which was pretty interesting. But yeah, I'd like to kind of understand like what your experience was, and did your experience change or well influence the amount of time you took off with your second child?
I think I was not really prepared for how different it would be. I sort of had this expectation that I would be able to come back to work and operate at the same operate in the same way that I had done before, and be able to kind of give everything to my work. You know, I really enjoyed what I did, enjoy what I do now, and I'm really committed to it. But it was impossible to be as committed, um, certainly in terms of the number of hours I was doing, as I had been before, and trying to work out how I was going to do my job now, in a very different way, I think was really challenging. And there weren't many women in the organisation at the time who had very young children either, certainly at leadership level. there were women who had had children and who were older, but their experience, I think, had been quite different in that it was a really different organisation, now much bigger, and so there were people that I could talk to, but I think their experience was just different, and so yeah, I guess I wasn't very well prepared for sort of how big a change it would be, um, and I think really my decision to come back to work earlier, with my second one, was partly, because it was really hard to be at home with two little kids. But I think with my first son, I felt that I'd sort of missed out, on all of this understanding of what was happening with the business, that the business had changed so much, as well, and that if I was to take the same amount of time off the second time round and going back into a role that was more was wider reaching, I guess, in terms of responsibility, that it was not going to be possible to take that time off, and be able to come back and understand all the changes that had happened within the industry, and so and within the company. So I think I rushed back, the second time, which probably wasn't the right decision for me or like my family either, to come back in when my second child was so little. So I'm not sure if
What do you think? Because quite often I think the experience of mothers like kind of returning to work is, I think, is very similar. Like kind of, I think because they assume that you've already worked at the company before, you're going to kind of almost slot right back in, and the amount of attention that almost goes on to new joiners trying to kind of do onboarding and all of those kind of things is almost like completely forgotten. And when you take a year, even half a year, even 3 months out of an organization, like you said, there's so much that kind of is changed. And I feel like you almost dropped back in and left to kind of just figure it out without really that kind of the same methodical thought process that would be given to any other new start. And I think that's also one of the things that then the experience of kind of going back is so overwhelming. Not only you, especially, I mean, having your first as well, like you're trying to navigate logistic hell, like as well. So trying to drop off and like kind of no time is your own. You're trying to learn what's happened to the organization, learn new tools, learn like kind of all of these things. And at the same time, it almost feels like that is completely overlooked from an individual experience of joining a company again. It's not kind of perceived in the same way. And I don't know why organizations kind of fail to really see that actually you have got to treat women that are returning to work, or even fathers or working parents, like kind of if they have taken a significant amount of time out, like the advantage of then being able to be treated as if you are onboarding somebody again, I think would go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I think also just having that open dialogue and looking at it before women go off, or is really important, because I think the experience is often you sort of get pregnant, you find out what the maternity policy is within your
Yeah.
organisation, you submit your forms from your doctor, and then you do a handover perhaps to somebody who's covering your position, and then off you go. But there isn't really any necessarily communication or conversation up front around, okay, when what the support looks like when you come back, if there is any at all, or just making women feel comfortable in that they will be supported when they come back. But as you say, it doesn't really exist, and everybody coming back into work has a different experience, right? Like, how quickly they come back, so what stage their child's development is, whether they've got family support, whether it's all paid childcare, what that childcare looks like, what that means for their working day in terms of pickups and drop-offs, and but also I think, you know, the emotional side of things of returning to work is going to be different for everybody, and certainly for lots of women I think it's really hard, because there's this sort of, you know, guilt that perhaps you should be with your child. And so I think, you know, having for companies to better support women with that transition and really onboard them, I think is really important, as you say. And just to talk to them and listen to what's going on and work out, you know, because for some people, I think they can come straight back in to work, and perhaps they've got, you know, really good support in place around them to be able to do that. But for others, it is more challenging. Perhaps they need a slower transition, and you really want to set them up for success. So yeah, I think, you know, it should be something that companies are better supporting women with.
Definitely. And also trying to balance the difference between what is maybe said or written on a piece of paper versus the reality, as you said, like kind of before, of part-time working and all of those things. Is that actually the reality? Like, kind of, when we say that they can accommodate or do these sorts of things, if you don't have those conversations to check how that's actually working in practice.
Yeah, like, can they do their job in those part-time hours as well? Like, what support needs to be in place for that too? I think that was, you know, partly my experience, like, of coming back to work, was that it was actually kind of impossible to do my job in the hours that I had to do it. Even if I was kind of working 7 days a week, it would have been challenging. But certainly, you know, with both my children, I came back working a 4-day working week, but I definitely wasn't doing that.
I did the same.
So it's, you know, companies acknowledging that, right? Because actually, for me to be really successful in that role, I couldn't do the scope of what I was doing, and I needed more support in place to be able to be successful. So, you know, I think where you have somebody in a role, particularly in a leadership position, where their hours, or, you know, have changed, it's like, can they actually do the job in those hours? Because otherwise they're always going to feel like they're failing, basically.
But do you think the perception of you changed when you returned to work?
No, I don't think I had that experience, really. Do you mean in terms of sort of capability, or it, like, now that I was
Yeah,
working?
or expectations and stuff like that.
I mean, I think that there was a huge amount of expectation in terms of what I would be able to do. And that was probably not really possible, just, you know, in terms of what we've just talked about. Like, it was, particularly after my second child, I had a huge job, and it was, you know, I was covering so many areas, and the business was going through a huge amount of change. And I think there was a expectation of what I was going to be able to deliver that just wasn't really going to be possible, really, for anybody. So
I was going to say, like, kind of, but isn't that like what you just said then about, we've talked quite a lot about the amount of hours and stuff like that, but there's also a part, I think, that the perception also needs to change in general about, well, what are people expected to deliver? Like, not necessarily the amount of hours that, and is that even feasible, like, for an individual? Because you see so many times that I think women who are in leadership positions, whether they have children or they don't have children, overly trying to, like, compensate for the fact that they maybe feel a certain way, or there is a bias, or kind of, and it's about, I think there's a bigger thing, not rather than just kind of feeling like we can't work flexibly or like dynamically and we're fixed to this 40, 50, 60, whatever hour kind of week, and we have to be available all the time, and trying to shift that to kind of go, well, isn't it just about output? Like, isn't it just about actually what we're able to, but also the expectation of what you're expecting people to deliver that needs to be the conversation, not what hours people do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely interesting within the context of kind of imposter syndrome, I guess, which is something that is talked about a lot with women and is definitely real.
You've helped hundreds of people find their career opportunities. If there is one myth you would like to dispel, what would it be and why?
If you want to, improve your diversity within your organization and bring people in, you need to remove bias from the process, and allow opportunities for more people. And I think, something that some studios that we've spoken to in the past is like, talking about putting these frameworks in place, I guess, to do that. Their concern is that it takes away some of the, if you formalize the process too much, it takes away some of the sort of cultural feeling that they're looking to achieve throughout the recruitment process. But actually what it's doing is just making it fairer and for everybody, and that's ultimately what you want, right? And also, you want to find the right people. So, and how are you going to do that if you're just hiring your mates or asking everybody different things or asking for different things from people? So I think there's kind of preparation and thought that needs to go into every hire that you make, beyond just thinking about, well, what's the job and that's it. So.
Definitely.
And then what are the things that you think hold women back the most?
We've talked about, I guess, a lot within the kind of context of motherhood. And so I think that, the things that I think about in terms of that is, just like the sort of government policy in terms of childcare, maternity and paternity, but more the paternity policy, as we talked about. But I think, beyond that, it's just generally sort of bias and assumptions around gender roles and perpetuation of sort of stereotypes and discrimination, and that, leading to women viewing themselves in a way, or having a sort of lack of confidence, which in itself holds women back. I think the list could go on and on, but those are some of the sort of challenges as I see them.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us today to share your story. We really appreciate your thoughts. Very inspiring as well. Thanks, everyone, for listening to Uplift and Elevate. Our goal at Uplift Her is to develop effective and lasting change by focusing on building a strong community, providing essential career development resources, and effective mentoring programs. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, follow us on Instagram, and reach out if you're interested in getting involved and learning more about our work.